Tell me about Republic Schools. Tell me about your company.
Yes, Republic Schools is a nonprofit organization that runs public schools in Tennessee and in Mississippi. We run 4 schools in Nashville, Tennessee, and we run 2 here in Jackson, Mississippi.
No, soon to be 2.
Soon to be 2, I guess as 2 as of next week.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Why Jackson?
We decided to come to Jackson because we wanted to go somewhere where the need is extremely deep and the demand is very high. So in Jackson and in Mississippi generally, kids have some of the lowest odds of going from the bottom to the top. I read a stat that showed that of all the counties in the United States, and I think there are over 3,000 counties in the United States, Jackson has the 4th lowest economic mobility for kids in poverty. And so we came here because kids here in particular need better options, but we also came here because there are some great partners, community partners, like Bishop Crudup of New Horizon, like Albert McGowan right down the street at Redeemer, who are strong partners who already are working within the community who wanted to partner with us to help improve public school options for kids.
What is the difference between your charter schools and, let's say, public schools that are just right down the street that have the same grade levels?
Yeah, I think what makes a charter school different in general is that a charter school is given more freedom to design their program in exchange for more accountability. So any charter school, not just us, is generally given the ability to have as long or as short of a school day as they think kids need and as what parents demand, can pick their own curriculum, can structure their own systems for behavior and culture and character. You get the picture. In exchange for that, charter schools are monitored carefully, and if charter schools don't perform, whether it's financially, academically, from an organizational viability perspective, they could be shut down. So it's really freedom for accountability. What makes Republic different even than other charter schools is that our kids coming through our program experience extremely deep academic gains pretty early on within their experience and are prepared for college when they graduate from or are on the trajectory to be prepared for college when they graduate from high school, and generally go beyond their grade level heading into high school. And there are a lot of different design elements for that, but some of them are having a bit longer of a school day, having an intense focus on literacy, using data to drive instruction, having an academic approach to character education so that kids are not just learning skills, but they're learning the right way to do things and really developing themselves as people.
There's a lot to be said about method, about how to get kids educated. You know, what's the actual physical method? You know, you have books and you have videos, and of course you have teachers and pads and paper and all that, and there's goals that are in mind to get kids better educated so they can be on track to go to college. But how tough or how easy is it, or how important also is it to motivate, to get people, whether it's administrators, teachers, parents, students, motivated to learn and to teach?
Yeah, I find that kids intrinsically should like school. I think the problem with the way that we've designed school is that we've been so unimaginative about how we talk about and think about school. The subjects have all the same names. The school days are generally run from the same time. We even read some of the same books that we did 50 years ago. Classrooms in general haven't changed that much since I was in school, my parents were in school, or even their parents were in school. And so I think we're afraid to change schools to make them more compelling for kids. But the minute we start to ask the question, what do our kids need now, not just what have we done in the past, and what can ignite our kids' passion for learning, it's actually not that hard to get kids to really care about what they're doing. And the same goes for parents. You know, I have never met a parent who didn't want what's right for their kid, who didn't want their kid to go to the best possible school. And what I've found is that parents are willing to go above and beyond, drive across the city to go to the right school, deal with longer school hours, and come in and have as many meetings are required, although we don't really require much, in order to help their child to access the best possible education.
Now talk about your administrators and your teachers. Their motivation or how to motivate them. You know, I'm just walking down the hallway and you guys are practicing today, and it looks like they are like laser focused on when students actually get to fill these classrooms and hallways.
Yeah, so we place a special emphasis on practice. So we're not the kind of organization that brings teachers into a room and just talks at them during training, like the sage on the stage, just listen to me and I'm going to tell you how to be a great teacher. We're big on getting up, simulating the classroom environment, and simulating the different challenges and opportunities that exist within a class, and taking a sort of John Wooden-like approach to the details around school. So, we're fond of talking about how John Wooden, there's that anecdote about how he brought the players in the first day of practice. We're talking about Bill Walton and people who were top recruits in the country, and the first thing they did was just put their practice putting on and off their socks to avoid blisters. And so there's no detail too small for us to practice or to fixate on. And I think what you just saw out there, I think it was practicing the entry into a classroom. So how do we walk around the hallways? How do we deal with large movements of kids? Like, let's say, for instance, kids arriving for the beginning of the school day or leaving at the end of the day, like points where you need to account for everybody, ensure everybody's safe, and then either begin the school day or end it and get kids on the bus.
You've probably been asked this before, but what's the difference between the public school down the street again and the charter school?
Yeah, I think the difference, is it depends on the charter, right? There are dramatic differences between charters, but I think the difference comes from that freedom to design the program. So if I'm a principal at a traditional public school, and I went to traditional public schools, and my uncle was actually the principal of my middle school. So Mr. Raffone at IS 51 in New York City, the school I went to, if he had a great idea for how to structure the school day to make it a little longer to ensure that kids had more literacy, he couldn't do that. If he wanted to pick his own curriculum, he couldn't do that. If he wanted to incentivize teachers within his building in a way that he thought would best work for the adults that he could not do that either. You can go on and on and on. And so the freedom is the critical factor, the freedom to actually design a program that meets the needs of your kids. And what kids in South Jackson, for instance, need are not even the same as the kids over here towards the north side of town need it. And I'm glad that each of our school leaders has the freedom to design a program to meet the needs of our kids.
Let's talk about the standards that are within the contract that you have to have this charter school in Jackson, Mississippi. Do you think those are easy or difficult standards to meet? And what if you don't meet them?
Yeah, I think they are definitely not easy standards to meet, but they're not impossible, right? So our standards are generally, there's academic performance standards, so meaning, a public school, generally speaking, especially after children have been in for a few years, should be outperforming the city and state in core academic subjects like math and reading.
Okay, let me stop you right there.
Yep.
Okay, you'll have 1 year of data under your belt.
Yeah.
I know that the charter contract is, I believe, for 5 years. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, do you feel confident in saying that after this 1 year that I know it's just one school,
Yeah.
but it has a lot of promise. At least it looks like on paper, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That you would be willing to say that these kids that went through one academic school year, coming from wherever they're coming from, will be able to or have been outperforming Jackson Public School kids or even the state average?
Yeah, I think it comes in three waves, right? So traditionally, our schools in Tennessee, and we have 4 schools now with a few years of data each, and our 2 flagship schools now have 5 years of data each. Those schools, after their first year, outperform the city and state in core subjects.
And that was in Nashville?
In Nashville.
Okay, gotcha.
But that was under the pre-Common Core tests. So the way I think of it now with this, with these quasi-Common Core tests, I guess you can call them, because we don't call them Common Core in Mississippi or Tennessee, but they're based on the Common Core. I think you see the gains less dramatically early, but you see them sustained over time. And so my prediction is, in year one, you see our students outperforming the schools in the same neighborhood that they come from. That's the prediction. In year two, they outperform probably the city, and some of our schools and some of our subjects will outperform the state. By year three, they're consistently outperforming the state. By year four, they'll be outperforming districts like Madison and DeSoto that are high performing. Now, in the past, under the easier tests, like the pre-Common Core tests, we had kids even in their first year. So for instance, I was a school leader of Nashville Prep. Our kids outperformed Williamson County, which is our equivalent of Madison County in Tennessee. Our kids, over 90% students of color, over 85% students on free and reduced lunch, outperformed in math Williamson County after 1 year, and dramatically outperformed the city and state.
But
under the old test.
But you're not willing to say that right now.
No, because it's a different test, different standards, a much harder test, which means that, under the old tests, it was very computational based, and in reading, it was extremely predictable. And so our kids who, spend a ton of time, for instance, like adding fractions with unlike denominators in predictable ways, would see something that was predictable. Now the tests are a little less predictable, build lots and lots of different skills together, which means that the gains take a little bit more time, but they can be sustained more over time because the kind of skills that you teach build upon each other. 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade actually look very similarly. It's like building a house on a foundation.
I was just talking to Kate about bringing a child to one of your charter schools and whether or not they would need to pay anything to attend those schools. And of course, some of the criticism, and we'll talk about that in just a second, is that the money follows the child.
Yeah.
Right? At least that's what the funding mechanism now is in the state of Mississippi. But if I were to bring a child and that money from whatever school district they were in follow that child to help fund their education at the charter school, the parents don't have any other financial obligation, do they?
No, never. We don't charge fees. We don't charge any tuition. We're a free public school.
Well, then let me start talking dollars and cents with you.
Yeah.
Is that money that follows the child enough money to fully fund the education at a charter school?
I think in general it is. I'm an advocate that education spending should always be more in general within public schools. So we could use more funding. The public school down the street could use more funding. And actually, I'm extremely interested and have in the past locked arms with folks from different types of schools to make an argument for as much public education funding as possible. I know that's a huge debate here within Mississippi. But the one thing that we do raise money for is we start one grade level at a time. So it takes us 4 years sometimes to reach sustainability. So for instance, if you only have one grade level, you might have one dean of students, one director of operations, one principal. And so you have some overhead until you reach the point of full economies of scale. So by 4th year, we're completely sustainable on public dollars. Now, sometimes we might raise money for a facility because we have to pay for our own facilities, transportation. But in general, we are sustainable after the 4th year.
Do you have other funding sources?
Yes. So somewhere, depending on the year and the time, we raise something like 5 to 10% of our funding from philanthropy. And the reason why we do that is because of the startup costs. If we weren't starting new schools and we were just working within our existing schools that reach full growth, we probably wouldn't have to raise any money.
Did you need to raise that much for Reimagine and for Smile Up?
Yes, yeah. So we have to raise money just to open the doors. So for instance, to give you an example, in order to open Smile Up, the school we're sitting in right now, we had a year from the point where we received our charter to the point where we opened our doors. And until you open your doors, you don't receive a single dollar publicly. And so you've got to raise that money in order to hire a staff, to get this building open, to find the teachers, et cetera. But then also, once the building opens, we open one grade level at a time so we can ensure the quality scaling of a program in order to have one dean of students for one grade and have a director of operations and principal who can build that school over time. We've got to raise that too.
where did the 5 to 10% come for the schools in Jackson? Can you give me
Mixture of sources. So we received a $9.6 million grant from the federal government last year. Obviously, they didn't hand us a check for $9.6 million, but basically that grant said, you're a high-performing organization, you have a proven track record of success. For the next 5 years, basically any school you start, we're going to really help you a lot with your startup funds. That is by far the largest source of philanthropy, but we also have a lot of relationships with local foundations and local individuals who've given us some funds.
Can you give me some examples of some people that are local?
Yeah, I think Ruben Anderson, former member of the Mississippi Supreme Court, Jim Barksdale has been a supporter. Leland Speed has been a supporter. Those are just a few to name, and obviously the namesake of this school. Sorry, I knew that was
okay.
Obviously the names. Yeah, I'm good. Obviously the namesake of the school, Joel Smilo, the former CEO of Playtex, who has some relationships with some folks here in Mississippi, was compelled by this project and gave us a $1 million donation.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah,
So,
we're
so
very
is that
fortunate.
9.6? Was that just for both of the schools in Jackson, or was
No,
that for
yeah, it's
all
spread.
the
Yeah,
schools?
it's spread out. It
Oh,
basically says it covers the startup costs and additional grade levels in schools over the next 5 years within Republic. So there are a few schools in Nashville that haven't reached their full growth levels yet. So part of the grant goes to those schools to help us support scaling up to sustainability there. And we've got our 2 schools here. And then if we want to start any future schools here, we've got at least one more charter we've already been approved for. But if we want to start any future schools, that grant says we would receive support from the federal government for that. And part of what we have to show for the federal government in order to get that grant is our ability to be sustainable on public dollars alone. That is a huge factor in success of an application.
What's the budget for Republic on a yearly basis? What's the budget for Smilo on a yearly basis?
Yeah, I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but the easiest way to do the math is in Nashville, it's about $9,000 we receive per kid, and then you just multiply that times the amount of kids we have on any given year, and that's generally our budget, and you could add 5% to say we would 5 to 10% to have philanthropy.
Sure.
And in Nashville and in Jackson, it's slightly different. You could say 8,000 to 8,500, depending on how the formula comes out. And so that plus 5 to 10% is usually our budget every year. I don't have that off the top of my head, but I could send that to you.
Okay, well, let me just do the quick math. How many students are at Republic?
Uh,
Sorry, at Reimagine, I'm sorry.
At Reimagine, there are somewhere on the order of 230 students this year.
Okay, how about here?
Here, 120.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's a big budget.
yeah. Big budget, but a lot of people to serve. You know,
How
still.
many teachers?
We have, I can't give you the exact numbers off the top of the head, but I'll give you the sort of grade level by grade level. Each grade level has 2 reading teachers, 2 math teachers, a science/computer science teacher, and a history teacher, and then usually 1 special educator. So that would be 7 teachers per grade level. So here what you'll probably see out there is 7 teachers plus a dean of students, a director of operations, and a principal.
That's all?
Well, just to start from 1 grade level, yeah.
Just for 1 grade level?
Yeah.
And how many grade levels will be here?
Eventually, this one will have 4 grade levels. This will be a grade 5 to 8 school.
And then how many grade levels at Reimagine?
Reimagine will be the same.
All right, here's some fastballs. Ready?
All right, go for it.
You've probably been asked all these questions before.
Yep.
There have been some criticisms of charter schools
Yeah.
from people here in Mississippi. This is a new area. We just don't know what to expect. We can see what the success has been in Nashville on paper and through different lives of students, administrators, their parents, and the outcomes.
Yeah.
I heard one person describe charter schools as selling out a state's education to big business,
Yeah.
where they're going to make money off of the poor people in Mississippi, and in a way, or in a direct way, sucking public money out of the public school system.
Yeah.
I wanted to see what your thoughts on all of those criticisms are.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where those folks are coming from. For-profit schools, for-profit charter schools are not allowed in the state of Mississippi. We're a nonprofit institution. And I think it's a simple question to people who support schools is, do you trust small or nonprofit organizations that largely are made up of community members to run one school at a time with a school leader that's completely empowered with the freedom to design a program that can meet the needs of parents? Or do you trust larger systems who usually adopt a pretty one-size-fits-all solution to a given city or county or school system? Which of those two would you trust? The other piece is, right now, this debate about money within school systems assumes that the money somehow belongs to a system. Our belief is that the money belongs to the family. And so where they decide to go to school with that should largely be their business. And the key point being, though, that wherever they go needs to have certain standards, which is why Mississippi has a very strong charter school law. So for instance, we have to take the same standardized tests. And this is important because if money is following each family, which I believe it should, the state and city should know whether that school is performing well or not. So people aren't getting sold on something false. So you have to take state tests, the same state tests, so you know whether school is performing well. We have to report data the same way. We have to produce audited financial statements and post those statements. We have to post certain contracts above a certain amount of money. We're subject to the Freedom of Information Act, Sunshine Laws. We're subject to open meetings laws. You can keep going, right? Special education requirements, et cetera. So we are regulated in many ways like a public institution. The only difference is that we're given a lot more flexibility than a public institution. And so, my general belief is if you can give more flexibility to an institution that can be nimble to meet the needs of families and can empower those families to go where they think they can find the best education for their kids, that will lead to a better outcome than what our current system is, which is you tell somebody, you live in that neighborhood, you've got one option of where to go to school. And even if that school is F or D rated, that's it, and that's your neighborhood school. I have a real problem with that. And I think a lot of the people who are proponents of this idea of the neighborhood school, which is a great idea in theory, are often coming from the most privileged neighborhoods. So they have this Pleasantville-like view of what school is like. I say hi to the mailman on the way over, the dog's barking, the sprinklers are going, walk to school. It's a beautiful experience, right? Those people probably love neighborhood schools. They're protecting their neighborhood schools. But if your option for a neighborhood school is an F or a D rated school, or even a C rated school, who wants their kid even going to a C or B rated school? You want A rated schools for your kids. You want to give people the freedom to go to the right school, and you want to be able to measure whether the schools that they're going to are meeting some kind of bar so that you can provide information to parents so they can make great choices.
Well, then, are public schools just are they tanking? How are they? How do we have failing school systems, public school system, in 2016 when there are many ways, many methods, many ways to motivate all of the above, students, teachers, parents. There's at least there seems to be enough money out there to fund those ideas and the way that school is taught. Where did we go wrong? What's wrong with the public school system where there would be a need for charter schools?
Yeah, I think we need to, one assumption that everybody needs to make is that the public school system needs to thrive and it needs to exist. And anybody who talks about dismantling the public school system is reckless and naive about where we are, especially in the state of Mississippi with the levels of poverty that Mississippi has right now. And I say this as somebody who went through largely public schools as a kid and went to a public university for college. So we need to support our public schools. And that's part of the reason why I work in public charters, is that if the public school system continues on its trajectory, it will continue to, in general, there are some good public school systems and some rough public school systems. There are great public schools and some rough public schools. But in general, if we continue on the trajectory, especially the trajectory that we're on in Mississippi, without some kind of innovation and real tension within the system around creative solutions to change outcomes for kids, then the public school system itself will suffer. And we already see that in evidence of Jackson. We're losing thousands of kids over the past few years before we even got to charter schools. So people look at charter schools and say, well, you're gonna take kids as if they belong to the system. And what I believe is we all need to work together to bring as many people back into the system as possible. And instead of viewing charter schools as somehow outside of the system, just view them as another tool within the system in Jackson to help solve this problem of flight from the city, underperformance for kids, and just get to the point where instead of us being fourth worst in the country for economic mobility for kids, we go to a point where Jackson is the best place to grow up as a kid, and that you have the best outcomes. You can escape poverty. It doesn't matter where you grow up. That's what we need to be focused on.
How does Republic in Jackson, Reimagine, Smilo, how does it partner with public schools? How does it partner with the public school system?
Yeah.
Help me understand that.
Yeah, we're trying. We've had one preliminary meeting with the Jackson Public School System, and in that meeting we offered, for instance, to provide our computer science curriculum to the entire district for free. And the district to date has not taken us up on that offer, but we know that some of these things take time. And so, we've expressed pretty loud and clear that we want the Jackson Public School System to thrive. And whether it's our computer science curriculum, whether it's our teacher training, whatever expertise we can provide, we're ready to provide it and want to partner with the system. And at the same time, there are plenty of amazing educators from the Jackson Public School System. We've hired some of them. We have a lot to learn, too, from the best and brightest within the system.
They haven't taken you up on that offer.
They haven't taken us up on the offer,
Why
no.
do you think that is? You think they're embarrassed, or they have pride, or they don't think it's going to work? What is it?
I don't know, to be honest. My mom always told me to assume the best, so my general feeling is it's just people have other priorities, and I know that at the start of a school year, there's a lot going on, and so I expect that we'll get there. And I also think that it takes a while to build trust. And I think right now, a lot of people are expecting charter schools like ours and the school system not to get along. And I think there are people within the charter community and within the school system that are gonna give people excuses not to get along and not to collaborate. And my general feeling is, and I know of most of the members of my team, is even if there's a tough moment, even if there's a misunderstanding, even if they don't take us up on our offer right away, I believe that people go to work every day to do what's best for kids. I certainly know that's true of our team. And so I know that as long as it's an operating assumption, we're going to get past this and we're going to work together.
You said earlier in our conversation, and Tommy told me this as well, that the charter schools aren't allowed to make money. Am I right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Then what's in it for Republic?
Yeah.
All the way from Nashville to Jackson.
Yeah, I think what's in it for Oxfam or what's in it for the Red Cross. There are tons of nonprofit institutions that work either cross-state or across international boundaries. I think it has to do with somebody's intrinsic motivation. That's what generally motivates people within the nonprofit space. And so for some people, they believe that either this is their higher calling, and that the best way to live that biblical principle of treating others how you would want to be treated is to use your privilege to help as many kids as possible. I know that's certainly my motivation. My mom was a nurse, still is a nurse, and works in nursing homes. And I grew up just watching my mom. She could have done the bare minimum and gotten away with it every single day, collected a paycheck and moved on, but I saw her work extra hours to help people, go visit people. She used to even invite people at the nursing home to come to our Thanksgiving dinners. And so for me, there's and I know this is true of a lot of our folks, the more people you can help, just the more satisfied you are with life in general, and the more you're living up to just the power and promise of the privilege that you're given. I think in addition to that, like, it's hard work, and I think it's hard work for the folks working at Jackson Public Schools. It's hard work for people working at Republic or Midtown. And I think once people start seeing the humanity in it, right, that somewhere across town, 2 weeks from now, there's going to be a teacher getting up in front of kids at a traditional public school and at a charter school, struggling to get kids to learn, working their hearts out to do the very best that they can because they really care about children. And we as education leaders within the city can never lose sight of that. That in classroom after classroom, year after year, there are going to be great people with the best of intentions getting up in front of kids, and our job has to be to support them and remove the distractions from their work.
So, in layman's terms, short answer is this is your moral and social responsibility to do this.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, we're in a world right now where in 2016 there are a lot of conversations about race, and my background before is I worked for President Obama's first campaign, and I was compelled for many different reasons, one of which was his biography. And I felt like his speech on race was one of the most, in Philadelphia, was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. And then fast forward now to the end of his term, the promise of his presidency still hasn't fully been met, obviously. And we live at a time where people are as divided as they've been my entire lifetime. And it's sometimes really hard to figure out what your place is within that conversation, especially if you're somebody like me who is, not exactly white or black, right? And so some people are confused, and depending on what your job is, some people are just paralyzed by the whole situation. I feel a great privilege every single day to show up to work and know that there are kids out there who are working within a fundamentally unequal system and hundreds of years of history of discrimination that need somebody in their corner, that even if we've got folks who are going to make a million different mistakes, and I know I certainly do every single day, if you work your heart out and have the best of intentions within education, you can move our kids forward, make progress, and ensure that they're not just becoming somebody else's employee, that one day they're going to start the business that's going to employ other people, and that's how we can break the cycle of poverty.
I'd like to wind up the interview because I know that you probably have other stuff going on, being the CEO. Let me go back and ask you another money question. As you know, there has been a lawsuit filed by the Southern Poverty Law Center about the funding mechanism for charter schools. I don't know if they completely are opposed to charter schools, but it's just the way the money is taken out of the public school systems. I wanted to get your comment on that.
Yeah, I think there are a few things. I think it's really important to ask the Southern Poverty Law Center what their intentions are. There were some statements that they put out the past couple weeks that they're not against charter schools and they don't want to shut charter schools down. That begs the question then, why are they spending their time and money on this if they don't oppose charter schools? I think that we just had a rally today in front of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and what I was hearing from our parents out there was just a real question as to what has happened to this organization that so many people had grown to respect within our community. I certainly did. My mom used to make me watch movies about the Southern Poverty Law Center. And we all just are really puzzled as to what it is they're trying to accomplish here, and also why we hadn't heard from them up until now on this question. So if they were really worried about equity within funding, how come they didn't approach us to get involved in initiatives to increase public school funding for all in the state? I think beyond that, what I heard today from our families was that there's a real sense that the Southern Poverty Law Center has this attitude of, we know what's best for you, meaning our parents. And I think it raises questions. We have an organization that has spent zero time in our schools, zero time talking to our parents, who claim to know what's in the best interest of our parents and are trying to shut down the schools that our parents believe in and want to send their kids to. it's very clear to me that the Jackson community is already rejecting that. And if I were the Southern Poverty Law Center, I would really rethink this lawsuit, because with each passing day that they move this thing forward, they're not only going to lose the lawsuit, but they're going to lose any legitimacy that they have within this community.
That sounds almost like a threat.
It's not a threat. I mean, there's a couple of things going on here. Number one is their case is extremely weak legally, but beyond that, it's weak morally. So what you saw outside today were a ton of families who are living within one of the most unequal places in America, fourth lowest economic mobility for kids of any county in the United States, with a school system that we all know needs to get better fast. Nobody would wait years and keep sending their kids to a school system in the hopes that it's going to get better. We would all want the best possible options we can have. As I said before, there's real effort here underway to try to create some kind of collaborative spirit between charter schools and Jackson Public Schools, so we could start to operate as one system and start bringing people back within the system. Having outside organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center come in here who spent zero time within our schools, zero time talking to our parents, trying to drive a wedge between us and the system, and trying to drive wedges between different parents who make different decisions about their schools. It's not a threat. It's just an extremely reckless move on their part, and we don't need more division in Jackson, Mississippi.
Well, then what do you think their true intentions are, and do you think they're going to be successful with this lawsuit? Because basically it cuts to the heart of the funding for what you want to do here in Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, from my understanding, like the shots are being called in Montgomery. And so I think, like, to really know the true intentions here, I think, if you were to talk to people who work at the Southern Poverty Law Center here in Jackson, my sense is they are going to pass the buck to Montgomery and say, hey, like, there's so-and-so person up there who's really got it in for charter schools up there, and I'm just following orders. Which obviously, like, that doesn't inspire people. Like, you go to work for the Southern Poverty Law Center because you believe in racial justice. And so, my expectation is that the folks who I have every reason to believe are good people who work here in Jackson should make an independent decision about what they think is right for the city. And I know for a fact that some of the people who work at that office are traditionally people who we should be working together on so many different civil rights issues, but it makes it really hard when this is what we have to spend our time on. I think beyond that, I think what their motivation is probably largely linked to what our parents were getting at today, which is this idea that they think they know what's best for our parents. They really do. So they're the epitome of the neighborhood school advocates who probably went to schools that, largely were like these Pleasantville-esque neighborhoods where they're saying hi to the mailman and walking through their neighborhood, waving to folks, walking through the sprinklers, dropping their kids off to a great school. And there are probably a lot of them, including probably the lead attorney in this case, who don't understand the reality for our parents. And so I think a simple step they need to take is just sit down with our parents and say, why did you make the choice that you made? What kind of options did you have? How can we all work together to help this system? They have not done that yet. It seems to me that would have been a prerequisite to filing a case in Jackson, Mississippi.
Have they reached out to you, or you reached out to them?
They've never reached out to us. We tried, so there were rumors that this case was going to be filed, and we tried to reach out to them and say, hey, like, what's going on, all of that. They were very hard to get in touch with, and the key person on this case was out of the country when this thing was filed, so, to my knowledge. So it feels to me like something that's happening from outside Jackson, and to me that tells me that we should pay a lot of attention to where this goes. And we know this is true, that there's a larger motivation here coming from outside Jackson, because the Southern Poverty Law Center has done this in other states before. This is a larger strategy that they're adopting, this one-size-fits-all. So they're like, well, we sued on charter schools in New Orleans. We sued on charter schools in Louisiana. now that we have moved on from those cases or have more resources, let's find another place. Oh, we opened an office in Jackson, and we've had an office in Jackson for a while. Why don't we just file a case there? Because we read this case from 150 years ago that tells us that we might have something to talk about in court for the next few years.
Are you afraid? And what if they win? I mean, what
Yeah.
would happen to the charter schools here in Jackson that you've created?
I'm not afraid. I believe ultimately that, number one, I think, I'm a lawyer, and I looked at their case, and it seems to me like they picked the wrong state to file this kind of suit in. So from a legal perspective, I'm confident. From a political perspective, I'm also confident, because they have very little political legitimacy for their argument. So what you saw today were a ton of parents from all across the spectrum, different racial backgrounds, different economic backgrounds, people from the business community coming through, who showed up on their doorstep and made an argument to them. And you're going to see that happen over and over again as long as this case is alive. And what our parents are saying is, they're saying it to anybody who's paying attention here, that there is a real constituency here that wants better options. And I fundamentally believe that whenever you have forces within the community who earnestly are asking for something better, that in and of itself is political power. And the Southern Poverty Law Center right now, from my opinion, lacks that kind of legitimacy within this community on this particular question.
Let me go back to the latest rounds of applications for new charter schools in Mississippi. I was talking to Tommy about this yesterday, and I actually attended the board meeting that happened here in Jackson a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. Oh, can I add one thing on the Southern Poverty Law Center
Yeah,
thing?
please, go ahead.
Yeah. I think that one thing that that has been part of the strategy in cases like this in the past is to try to drive a wedge politically. So I think, organizations like this come in and they try to say that this is a right-wing thing, right? I think they've picked the wrong context here, because I'm a Democrat. I've only worked for Democrats my entire life. I worked for Barack Obama's first campaign. I worked in his administration. They're coming after an organization that is anything but the kind of conspiracy that they're looking for. And so, and they found today, so for instance, today in front of their headquarters, the former chair of the Jackson Public School Board, Lee Harper, showed up and joined our protest. These are not the kind of folks that they traditionally go up against. And so I think they picked a context that isn't as neat politically as they would want it to be. And I think that's gonna create problems down the line if they're gonna try to drive a wedge between people within this community.
Okay. Let me go back to the question
Sorry.
about the new applications for charter schools in Mississippi. I asked Tommy, I said, is Republic one of those companies that wants to do another charter school
Yeah.
in Mississippi? He said no.
Yeah.
And I went, really? Well, tell us why.
Yeah, we have one charter that we applied for previously that we haven't started yet. So we're not going to apply for any more schools until we've fulfilled the obligations for the schools that we've been approved for.
Okay, let me
Yeah.
stop you there, and just want to understand
Yeah,
the whole process here. So you have Reimagine, okay, and that'll be in its second year, starting next week.
Yep.
Smilo is in its first year, starting next week. And you have another application which has been approved already, but you haven't opened that school. Is that
yeah,
right?
that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
In this building. So,
this building.
Yeah, so that side of the building will be another school.
And what grades will that be?
That will be a K to 8
Okay.
elementary school. Yeah,
And this will be again
5 to 8 over here.
5,
So it'll be 2 separate schools, 2 middle schools. Yeah.
2 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Keep going.
Yeah. We already have a charter for another school, so we have no need to ask the state or city for permission to open any future schools until we've, opened the ones that we have.
Okay. And you know what?
Sorry.
That's a very logical way of doing business. Do you foresee, because there is so much of a academic need and a want from parents in Jackson, or even in other parts of the state for that matter, opening more charter schools under Republic besides the 3 that are in the works right now?
I think so. I think absolutely. I think we've been inspired by the growing outpouring of support that we've had here. We love the children of Jackson. I absolutely love the teachers of Jackson, some of the grittiest, wonderful people I know. And so I have no reason to think that we're going to stop where we are. But we also might start school somewhere else within Mississippi. It might not just be all in Jackson, you know? So one day we might make it out to the Delta or to the coast.
Sure, that's the next area for my question.
Yeah.
And that is, where else do you see a need? And you know, the Delta is the first idea that pops into my head.
Right.
Is it the first area outside of Jackson where you would explore? Or
Yeah.
would you explore somewhere in northeast Mississippi, or, you know, let's say in the Meridian area, or down by Biloxi or Gulfport?
Yeah, I think these are all great places. I think in a perfect world we'd be in all of those places, but we are as much on our plate as I think as we can handle right now. I wouldn't want to add anything else.
So you don't have let's say a 10-year visionary
Not a
plan or
10-year,
anything
nah.
like that?
We have a 5-year plan, which is built into the grant with the federal government. And that plan includes the openings of the schools that we've gotten here and an application for 1 or 2 more here, I think. And we're probably not going to open even all the schools that we put in that application. So we're actually taking a slight step back because we want to make sure that we don't overcommit ourselves. Because, for instance, next year we're opening an elementary school, for instance. That's a totally new model for us. We've never opened an elementary before.
Where's that going to be?
That's the one that's over here, yeah.
The one over here, okay.
Yeah. And so we just want to make sure that we slow down for a second. We've got a high school that's halfway built out in Nashville. And so we want to make sure that we've built out the model that we have for grade levels that we haven't started serving yet before we start growing too much.
So you don't have any other approval for another charter school besides the 3 here in Jackson?
Yes, exactly,
Is
yeah.
that
The
correct?
2 that will be open this year and then the one that opens the year after, yeah.
Okay. Because you said something that I thought was interesting just now. You said you didn't think that you would open a school, or you don't have to open a school even though you would have a charter for it.
No, I didn't mean that. No, we have a perfect track record of opening schools that we have applications for. We've never handed a charter back and said we can't do it.
Okay.
And so if we ask for a charter, we're going to open that school. That's our general. We view a charter as a promise. So the minute we go to the state and we ask for a charter, we're going to fulfill that promise. Now, we might say we need an extra year or whatever, but we'll always open that school.
Okay. Just final question.
Oh yeah.
Let's say that you don't live up to some of those promises in the contract that you have. What happens to you? What happens to the school? What happens to the teachers and the students?
Yeah, I think in general, if we don't meet the promise of our of the key metrics that we lay out, the state has the ability to take any number of actions, including shutting us down.
Oh, wow.
And obviously there's probably a scale, right? So they can come and say we need to do a hearing and like ask you about, your attendance is 3% lower than you said it was versus, organization committed financial fraud or something,
So you have even more motivation rather than. Oh, it's okay.
Sorry.
Okay?
Yeah, I'm
You need
good.
some water?
I'm good. I've had this lingering thing for a couple weeks now. Sorry. Yeah.
So it sounds like there's even more motivation and oversight with a charter school over a public school,
Yeah.
and that's what I guess a lot of the motivation is to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have way more oversight. So you can't, nor should you be able to shut down a public school, a traditional public school, because of a couple of years of performance. Generally, traditional public schools are enduring institutions. They don't have an inherent right to exist forever. Every city that's ever existed has shut down and moved schools over time based on geographic patterns and the needs of communities. But we also don't establish traditional public schools as temporary institutions. They're generally, they're generally mainstays within communities. So, and charter schools, though, are viewed as operating under more market forces. So both, if you can't get a demand as a charter school, you don't have an inherent right to exist. And if you don't meet regulation, you don't have a right to exist.